Did you know that a surprising number of objects that you use every day are thanks to accidents? Let me show you what I mean. In this episode, we learn how a Swiss chemist unintentionally invented hippies.
He's really beginning to believe that he's gone completely mad, and you can see why.
How a bid to help cotton farmers is responsible for America's favourite sandwich.
It's kind of hard to imagine a world without it.
And the way a failed experiment helps feed the world, but also almost destroys it. Oops, I changed the world.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
August 14th, 1969. The decade that shook America is coming to a close.
We've got racial rights, women's rights, gay rights, the Vietnam War, thousands of angry young people heading to the streets, ready to fight for their rights.
A wave of counterculture is rising, and at the crest of that wave comes a music festival like no other. Woodstock. It's the soundtrack to a cultural revolution sweeping across America and beyond. And there's one mind-bending chemical fueling it all.
Lysergic acid diethylamide, also known as LSD.
It goes by many names: Acid, Lucy, California Sunshine, Blue Heaven. This stuff is really potent. Not that I would know anything about that or anything.
The LSD experience is a religious experience. The LSD kick is a religious ecstasy.
LSD's world-changing
And mind-altering.
and mind-altering story takes us on a psychedelic bike ride from medieval madness to chemical warfare and the explosion of counterculture.
Sounds like it's going to be quite a trip.
Our accidental hero is Albert Hoffman, Swiss-born, who has an idyllic childhood. You know, it's all chocolate, fondue and yodeling.
He graduates from the University of Zurich in 1929 with a doctorate in medicinal chemistry and gets a job at Sandoz Laboratories in Basel.
He's a regular guy, tasked with working on a very irregular fungus, ergot.
Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye crops. Its proper name is Claviceps purpurea. Their fruiting bodies emerge as these long, dark, finger-like protrusions from the ear of the grain.
It's extremely poisonous. One of its toxic effects is a form of gangrene called holy fire.
People felt a terrible, fiery sensation in their limbs and the loss of blood to their extremities, eventually leading to, well, basically their hands and feet dropping off.
It also causes convulsions, seizures, and vivid hallucinations. So imagine you're, just snacking on some rye bread or maybe an avocado toast and, tastes good. Next thing you know, you're on the ground, you're rolling around, your limbs are falling off, and you're convulsing in pain.
People actually did think that their limbs were being burned to charcoal, which is a pretty bad thing to happen from eating bread.
In the 10th century, there's an outbreak of this disease, which claims about 40,000 lives in southern France. And you can imagine how terrified people must have been.
Holy fire is a scourge across Europe for many centuries. But over time, doctors discover that ergot has medical uses.
In the 1500s, it's noted that sows that consume ergot go into labor. So midwives think that a woman who has a stalled pregnancy just needs a little bit of the fungus.
So it's interesting that ergot goes through this whole PR transformation from this poison into something that houses a whole host of potential solutions to problems.
Back to Albert Hoffman and the scientists at Sandoz, who in 1918 managed to isolate a compound called ergotamine.
Sandoz commercialised ergotamine to treat post-childbirth bleeding and migraines.
But Albert's not done yet.
Hoffman wants to keep working on ergot and identify more useful molecules.
He focuses his studies on lysergic acid, one of the chemicals found in ergot.
Hoffman looks at the chemical structure and realizes that by adding a specific chemical group to lysergic acid, he can create a molecule that has a very similar structure to a drug used as a circulatory and respiratory stimulant.
In 1938, he produces this analogous derivative. It's the 25th compound in the series, lysergic acid diethylamide, abbreviated to LSD-25.
Hoffman tests LSD-25 on a group of rats, but it's not as effective as existing respiratory stimulants. It looks like a failure.
The test does note that the rats become restless during the trial, but that's it. The drug is apparently useless and is shelved.
April 16th, 1943. World War II rages throughout Europe. Everywhere, except good old neutral Switzerland, that is, where Hoffman is still busy working away with lysergic acid.
Hoffman has this nagging feeling about LSD-25, like there's something more to it that's worth taking another look.
Hoffman creates some new LSD-25. He's going through the last few steps of the process when he starts to feel a little bit funny.
He starts to feel kind of restless and dizzy.
He says he experienced an extremely stimulated imagination and that he perceived an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes with intense kaleidoscopic play of colours.
Hoffman is basically having the world's first LSD trip.
And what do you do if you accidentally absorb a chemical that makes you hallucinate? Well, if you're Hoffman, you take it again, of course.
For science, you understand.
Hoffman figures, a dose or a quarter of a milligram should be safe. A milligram is 1,000th of a gram, so this is like a tiny fraction of a grain of salt.
Within 40 minutes, Hoffman records his first observations.
Hoffman wrote down in his lab book that he experienced visual distortions, symptoms of paralysis, a desire to laugh. He really was struggling to physically write the last words.
He says to his assistant, "I'm going home, I can't handle this." Now, ordinarily, you'd think he'd be bundled into a car and driven back by his assistant, but he doesn't do that. Instead, he attempts to cycle back home.
So Hoffman is riding his bicycle and the world around him is distorting like a curved mirror. He has this sensation that he's not moving, but his lab assistant said that they were going really, really fast.
Hoffman makes it to his bed, where he slips deeper and deeper into his mind.
This sounds insane, but everyday objects like furniture are transforming into these grotesque creatures. His next-door neighbour comes over to check in on him, and they take the form of a malevolent witch wearing a coloured mask.
So Hoffman has what I think we can call a bad trip. He's really beginning to believe that he's gone completely mad, and you can see why.
Eventually, the hallucinations wear off, and Hoffman feels better than ever.
What's really odd is that Hoffman doesn't experience any kind of come down or hangover, and he even says that he's experiencing the world with a new kind of clarity.
Hoffman is left with no doubt LSD is a powerful psychoactive drug. The applications in neurology and especially psychiatry, it could be huge.
Before they can do anything else, they tested on a menagerie of animal subjects.
To bring about any noticeable changes in behavior, they have to give relatively high doses. So mice lick themselves differently. Cats space out and get frightened of mice. In a chimpanzee community, the group freaks out because the test subject doesn't adhere to the social hierarchy.
Hoffman and the team approve LSD for human trials and begin distributing the drug to medical practitioners for further tests.
Hoffman is convinced that it can help with psychological disorders. So he encourages psychiatrists to try LSD themselves because he believes it can offer a window into the mind of someone suffering psychosis.
News of LSD's transformative properties soon spreads, eventually finding its way to the US government.
The The US military wants to know if LSD can be weaponized. They start by dosing regular soldiers.
2 hours later, the squad now drugged with LSD. The results were chaotic. Ordered to leave the field, he refused to go.
Then the CIA gets in on the act.
Spies know of that.
Only we call them agents.
Then they see in LSD a potential mind-controlling substance, and they start conducting experiments under the code name MK Ultra.
Beginning in 1953, MK Ultra is conducted in secret, using a combination of CIA-funded academic studies and some seriously dodgy practices.
They secretly administer the drug to unsuspecting people on the street and monitor the results.
The CIA is basically dosing medical staff, prisoners, you name it, in order to find out whether LSD has mind-controlling properties.
San Francisco, the cosmopolitan city, truly the city of many wonders.
At a California psychiatric hospital, a young writer called Ken Kesey is volunteering as a guinea pig on an MK Ultra project. The experience has a profound effect on him.
Ken Kesey is determined to get the word out about LSD and its mind-altering properties. He hires the Grateful Dead to play the acid test, a series of parties where they play trippy music and hand around LSD like it's candy.
At about the same time, Harvard psychologist Timothy Leary is also investigating psychedelic drugs.
Professor Leary is doing controversial experiments with another fungus-derived psychedelic that's called psilocybin.
Now, Harvard's not very impressed when they discover that Professor Leary is also taking the drugs himself, and he's also administering them to students outside of the experiments.
Leary is fired from Harvard in 1963, but that doesn't stop him experimenting with psychedelics. If anything, it spurs him on, and he becomes more and more vocal about the benefits of psychedelics.
We are now, whether we like it or not, in the psychochemical age.
And he's remembered for the phrase that he comes up with that becomes a kind of a chant of the 60s.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
The CIA has unwittingly helped propel LSD from a laboratory curiosity to the epicenter of counterculture.
This is the now generation. They feel disenchanted with the world around them, while they may, for the most part, be outside the mainstream of American life.
Plenty of iconic bands have admitted to the use of LSD, and these include Pink Floyd, Rolling Stones, and of course the legendary and late Jimi Hendrix. And it really expanded their musical horizons.
Paul, how often have you taken LSD?
About 4 times.
Don't you believe that this was a matter which you should have kept private?
You know, I'm quite prepared to keep it as a very personal thing, if you will too. If you'll shut up about it, I will.
A wave of LSD washes over American society at a critical time in US history. There's growing unrest about the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement is gaining momentum, and people are starting to realize what's really important to them. It seems that it's actually unbrainwashing people from any government messaging.
Just as ergot induces labor, LSD speeds up the birth of the counterculture. It's an anti-establishment movement, and as you can imagine, the government, they don't like it very much.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy #1 in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
The US government thought it could weaponize LSD, but instead it blew up in their face. Well, obviously now they want to put it back in the box.
A blanket ban on LSD across America goes into effect in 1970. The US successfully encourages the United Nations to follow suit.
It's a bitter blow for scientists because it becomes next to impossible to get LSD for research purposes. This research could lead to life-changing therapies, but it just fizzles out.
Some have used these drugs to journey into the uncharted tunnels of the mind.
For 4 decades, LSD remained in the shadows of illicit recreational use and fringe studies. But the man can't keep a good thing down forever. In 2016, researchers at Imperial College London published the first scans of a brain on LSD.
This is a groundbreaking moment, using cutting-edge technology to finally see exactly how LSD works. In the control subjects, all of the activity remains in the back of the brain near the visual cortex. However, on LSD, this activity spreads throughout the brain. Every part of the brain is firing and contributing to these incredibly vivid, wild images.
And the hope is that LSD can be developed to treat psychological disorders like depression and anxiety.
There's no doubt that Hoffman and his unplanned trip on LSD changed the world in profound ways. And I'm sure he'd be happy to know that the research into LSD continues.
Coming up, how a failed yellow dye explodes in popularity.
Here we go!
Literally. And when cutting-edge science meant keeping a fridge full of pee.
Now, this is something you don't want to mix up with your apple juice.
But first, you do know your nuts, don't you? April 25th, 1988. A team of 9 Soviet and 4 Canadian skiers approached the North Pole.
They are travelling from Siberia to Canada via the North Pole, carrying 110-pound bags the whole way. It is an incredibly tough journey.
And it's cold, like really, really cold.
On these expeditions, you really need over 3 times your normal caloric intake. You're burning so much fat just to stay warm, you need to pig out. With the risks involved, you really gotta be a little bit nuts to trek all the way to the poles.
Funny you should say that. As it turns out, in the Arctic, your best friends are nuts, if you see what I mean.
So the Canadians are chomping on 3 ounces of peanut butter a day. They say it tastes great, it's full of energy and fat as well.
But the Canadians' preferred fuel is completely new to their Soviet counterparts.
At first, the Soviets are quite suspicious of this substance, but they take it with vigor.
Oh, come on, Natasha. Everyone knows you have it with jelly, not vigour.
The good thing is, at Arctic temperatures, it doesn't stick to the roof of your mouth. It's so cold that the viscosity of it changes.
We're all familiar with peanut butter as a beloved national food, spread on sandwiches from California to New York.
It's kind of hard to imagine a world without it.
But a world without it, there was. Peanut butter's rise to fame comes down to the unlikely story of a legendary scientist, the world's weirdest recipe book, and a huge world fair.
I hope there's a nutty professor. There's a nutty professor, right?
Well, after a fashion. The story starts in the late 1870s.
Cotton production in the South has recovered to pre-war levels, which is a great achievement.
But it's not quite as good as it sounds.
Flooding the market with cotton only serves to depress the price, putting more financial pressure on farmers.
And if that's not enough, the intensive farming of this single crop is about to wreak havoc.
The big problem with repeatedly growing cotton is that it takes a terrible toll on the soil. It pulls out the nutrients, and farmers now have to spend their precious cash to put them back in. And another problem if you're only growing one type of crop is disease.
In the early 1900s, the boll weevil, a beetle that feeds on cotton, migrates north through the US from Mexico.
It's really tiny, it's less than 1/4 of an inch, but the damage is massive.
Boll weevil is devastating for southern farmers, and the cotton crop drops by 50%. American cotton production is faltering pretty badly.
Enter one George Washington Carver, an agricultural scientist who's climbed his way up from the bottom of the heap.
Carver's backstory is pretty incredible. He's born in Newton County, Missouri, towards the end of the Civil War. His parents are enslaved by plantation farmers.
His father is killed in a farming accident before he's born. Then he and his mother are kidnapped by marauding bushwhackers. But a search party is only able to recover young George.
Carver is fostered by a couple who encourage his thirst for knowledge. But getting the education he craves is a battle against segregation.
George was the first black student at Iowa State University. He was born into slavery, and now he's in higher education. Being the only black student at that time must have been extremely tough, but the fact that he was able to not just survive, but do so well shows a lot about the kind of character that he had.
George's determination and genius shine through, and on gaining his master's in agriculture in 1896, he's in demand.
Carver gets an offer from African-American educator Booker T. Washington. He set up a new agricultural school at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama and wants it to be run by black academics.
Carver seizes the opportunity. Remember those cotton sharecroppers plagued by pests and poor soil? He wants to use the 10-acre site at Tuskegee to try and solve these problems.
At this time, fertilizers were just too expensive, and Carver wanted to find a more cost-effective way of improving the soil. So he investigated rotating the crop, so basically switching from a soil-depleting crop like cotton to a soil-enriching legume crop like peas and beans.
Legumes are nitrogen-fixing plants. They bring nitrogen compounds into the soil. Nitrogen is a critical nutrient for both plant and therefore cotton growth.
Carver sets about searching for the ultimate nitrogen-fixing legume.
Beans have fewer than 100 nitrogen-fixing nodules on their roots. Soybeans will have several hundred. But there's one plant that produces over 1,000 nodules. The peanuts. They can introduce several hundred pounds of nitrogen in an acre of land per season.
But peanuts are a nut, not a bean, right?
Wrong!
Peanuts are actually more pea than nut. Although they may look and taste like a nut, they're actually legumes with the unique distinction that their pods grow underground.
Peanuts grow underground.
Yep, they sure do. In fact, they're also known as the ground nut.
Carver proves that by rotating peanuts and cotton, you improve the health of the soil and you also increase the yield of cotton produced overall.
To get the word out, Carver goes on tour in a horse-drawn wagon with all the mod cons. Farming supplies, lecturing materials, that sort of thing.
This travelling school is really instrumental in breaking this continuous cycle of cotton crop planting and showing farmers that there's another way to improve the soil.
But Carver and the wagon's success highlights a major flaw.
The peanut crop is improving the health of the soil, but the farmers don't exactly know what to do with all of these peanuts that they have grown.
It seems the crop itself is worth, well, peanuts.
In terms of economics, the supply outstrips the demand. People don't see peanuts as an attractive product to buy. You end up with barns full of peanuts going mouldy and frustrated farmers.
Carver does what he does best. He sets to work on the problem.
So Carver gets busy in his laboratory trying to figure out different ways to commercialize peanuts. Now, he doesn't come up with just 1 or 2 or 3 products. No, he comes up with over 300 products.
The list is as varied as it is long. Peanut coffee, mock chicken, cheese tutti frutti, shaving foam, axle grease, paper, glue, the list goes on and on.
In 1916, he publishes a bulletin for farmers called How to Grow the Peanut and 105 Ways of Preparing It for Human Consumption. Carver's timing is impeccable. The bulletin helps solidify the humble peanut as a useful cash crop.
By 1917, the farmers had produced over 1 million bushels of peanuts, raking in over $5 million, worth in today's money over $100 million.
Carver set out to save cotton, but in doing so, he accidentally creates a whole new southern farming industry. And the peanut is here to stay. But there's one thing that Carver didn't think of.
Peanut butter.
Ladies and gentlemen, step right up. It's the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, featuring the latest and greatest products and innovations from around the globe.
It's the biggest world fair of its time, and it is an absolute spectacle. Most rural people haven't been to a big busy city like St. Louis, let alone experience the culture of all of these other countries.
Food is a major part of the display. The ice cream cone, burgers, and Dr. Pepper are launched into the public eye at this fair. In the middle of it all, C.H. Summer, who's got a concession stand selling his own type of peanut butter, to say it's popular is an understatement. He sells $705.11 worth. That's over $20,000 in today's money.
Today, 13 states produce over 6 billion pounds of peanuts a year. Over 50% of this crop is then turned into peanut butter. Peanut butter is so popular in America that the average person consumes around 7 pounds a year.
And why do Americans consume so much peanut butter? The PB&J.
World War II. Grape Blade and peanut butter are on the US Army ration list, and American soldiers quickly figured out that the holy trinity of sliced bread, jelly, and peanut butter is a dish sent from on high.
After the war is over, American soldiers bring back this revelatory new snack, and sales of peanut butter skyrocket.
If you like peanuts, you'll like Skippy. Skippy Peanut Butter.
Today, the average American eats around 1,500 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches before they even graduate from high school. Yeah, it kind of checks out.
But peanut butter is more than just a go-to snack for hungry students.
In 2004, doctors tested a new therapeutic food based on peanut butter in Niger. A third of children with malnutrition were dying, but after eating the paste, the death rate dropped to 5%.
Today, it's used across the globe. It's probably saving millions of lives.
Carver could never have predicted his efforts to save the cotton industry would have had such a profound impact on the world long after his death.
Albert Einstein considered Carver one of the 10 greatest scientists of his time. Martin Luther King honors Carver by saying, "What an incredible example he is, raising himself from such paralyzing conditions of circumstance."
Carver receives many honours. President Roosevelt gives him his own national monument, which is a first for an African American. He's inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame and the US Department of Agriculture's Hall of Heroes. Carver is a true American icon.
Still to come, we look at what happens when the mentally unstable meet the morally questionable.
The guinea pig snuffed it.
But first, an altogether less treatable form of crazy. March 1st, 1954, on an island paradise in the mid-Pacific.
0 seconds and the unbelievable explosion detonated.
The Castle Bravo hydrogen bomb obliterates Bikini Atoll.
The shockwave visibly roared across the ocean and hit the camera ship miles away from ground point 0.
It's just mesmerizing, isn't it? It's just so much power on display. The radiation is what sets the trees on fire, just the radiation.
Within 1 second, it forms a fireball over 4 miles wide. The mushroom cloud reaches 130,000 feet high, touching the edge of the Earth's atmosphere.
It's the largest bomb that the US has ever detonated, and it was 1,000 times greater than the one that went off at Hiroshima.
The 1954 H-bomb detonation was another grim reminder to the world of the horror that an atomic war might bring to civilization. It would be a long time before the area of the test could be called safe enough for any kind of life to resume there. The Earth had received its warning.
At the heart of these mega weapons is a detonator that uses a conventional explosive, accidentally created over 150 years ago. Trinitrotoluene,
aka TNT.
To find out how TNT got inside the world's most powerful weapon, we've got to wind the clock back to 1863. This is the University of Göttingen, central Germany. It's a scientific powerhouse in a country renowned for its organic chemistry.
A lot of focus is being put on coal tar, a dark, syrupy byproduct of making a fuel called coke. It's a complex mixture of organic molecules. And German chemists are experts at using these molecules to produce synthetic dyes.
It's a dye that a young chemist called Julius Wilbrand is looking for when he mixes a component of coal tar called toluene into a mixture of sulfuric and nitric acid.
He leaves the concoction bubbling away and carefully purifies the product, creating this yellow crystal form. It looks like Wilbrand has made another synthetic dye.
But it turns out it's not that good and it fades over time. So basically, he leaves it on the laboratory shelf. We don't know much about Wilbrand after this little incident. It seems that he went off to become a chemistry teacher.
But what he doesn't know is this stuff packs a punch.
Wilbrand has no idea that he's just created what will become one of the most mass-produced explosives in history. Trinitrotoluene. 30 years later, and political tensions are at breaking point throughout Europe.
The German Empire has been up and running for a few decades, and it's really trying to nudge its way through onto the world stage. And part of that involves building its naval power against Great Britain in particular.
Germany's excellence in organic chemistry gives it an advantage in the development of new types of explosives.
And there's about 24 explosive products that are invented around this time, so it's a magnificent era for blowing things up.
Enter the second hero in our story, Karl Hussermann. He's a leader in Germany's synthetic dye industry and has just been invited by the Prussian War Ministry to work as a consulting chemist to the Royal Powder Mills in Hanau.
Hussermann is aware of this yellow solution called TNT. Now, he knows that it's a mediocre dye, but he is also well aware that its structure is packed with nitrogen, which traditionally comes in pretty handy when you're talking about explosives.
And Hussermann knows that a similar chemical called picric acid is already being used in artillery shells, but it has one big drawback.
The trouble with picric acid is that it has a tendency to react with metals, at which point it spontaneously explodes.
Hussermann must be thinking that TNT could also have explosive potential, but it's inherently more stable. I mean, Wilbrand didn't blow up, right?
So Hussermann wants to see whether he can put a detonator charge into TNT to see whether that's enough to make it go bang.
He's pulling up the plunger. Here we go.
The results are impressive.
The explosion is huge, with a blast wave travelling at 15,000 miles an hour, which is supersonic.
The chemistry of TNT is the secret to its explosive power.
When TNT is detonated, the carbon, oxygen and nitrogen within the compound react really quickly, producing huge amounts of gases. The total volume of the gases produced is 1,000 times that of the starting material, so you get this huge explosion.
The Germans begin to realise that TNT could be the wonder substance that they've been looking for.
Then, in 1914, European tensions erupt. It's all-out war, the likes of which the world has never seen.
World War I really changes the rules of warfare. It introduces modern warfare. Up until then, it's all been cavalry charges and shrapnel exploding all over approaching infantry. But now it's soldiers digging trenches. And the question is, how many shells do you need to bombard those trenches into submission?
Well, Tony, it turns out the answer is a lot.
Both sides in the First World War now have to ramp up production of TNT.
But Britain's main problem is that they can't get enough toluene to make the TNT they need.
600,000 tons of coal only produces 720 tons of toluene. It's about 0.1%, which is so small.
Germany is in an even worse position.
Although it controls vast coal reserves, Germany's reliant on imports for that crucial N part of TNT.
The key material they need is ammonia to make the nitric acid.
With the Royal Navy controlling the high seas, it can't get access to those raw materials.
But clever German chemists figure out a solution.
A German scientist in a laboratory in Karlsruhe works out a system of catalysts and high-pressure devices that can produce ammonia drop by drop from the air.
Fritz Haber figures out a way to convert nitrogen in the air into ammonia. It really is genius. The air is 80% nitrogen.
Haber's got the process, but he hasn't got the processing power. You're never going to create enough ammonia on a lab bench. This is where chemical engineer Carl Bosch comes in. By 1918, Haber and Bosch had scaled up the process to the point where they were creating 650 tons of ammonia each day.
That ammonia pours into Germany's artillery shells, but in the end, it isn't enough.
The United States joining the war proves to be the final straw for the German Empire and its allies, and the whole thing collapses for them. The Kaiser surrenders, and Britain, France, and the United States have won the First World War. By the Second World War, TNT is being used in most explosives.
And this war too is ended by TNT. When it detonates the thermonuclear devices dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But before we condemn Wilbrand, Hausermann, Haber and Bosch for the unimaginable misery their work's been used to inflict, there's more to this story. Because the quest to mass-produce TNT also leads to perhaps the world's biggest game-changing innovation. A chemical solution to the soil depletion those pre-peanut cotton farmers suffered.
Remember the Haber-Bosch process that was used to make ammonia? Well, that has contributed to the huge-scale production of fertilizer.
We produce 160 million tons of ammonia a year. More ammonia means more fertilizer, and more fertilizer means that more crops can grow, sustaining an ever-growing human population.
About half of the world's food now relies on ammonia fertilizer to grow.
The Haber-Bosch process is so fundamental to food production that it's estimated that 50% of the nitrogen in every human body comes from fertilizer.
Ever since the rollout of the Haber-Bosch process, the human population has been growing rapidly, taking us to where we are today with 7.5 billion people on the world and counting.
So, somewhat ironically, the accidental creation of an explosive used to end life on an industrial scale also enables us to feed an ever-growing human population. Not bad for a so-so die. (1942), 3 years before the atomic bomb brings the deadliest war in history to a shuddering close. Interred in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, is a doctor whose discovery of a new mental health treatment will transform the lives of millions. Lithium. It all starts in Singapore.
The fall of Singapore in the Second World War was a huge blow to the Allies, and it included the capture of 15,000 Australian service personnel by the Japanese, who were then held at the Changi camp.
Among the prisoners is Major John Cade.
Cade was the son of a psychiatrist and grew up around the grounds of mental asylums, eventually following in his father's footsteps and becoming a psychiatrist himself. So it's no surprise then that when Cade was captured, he was put in charge of the psychiatry section of the camp's hospital.
He notices a connection between the lacking of B vitamins and how this causes a disease to form in the body known as beriberi, which affects both the heart and the brain function.
And for the first time, he suspects that mental illnesses, which he's been surrounded by all his life, may also have a chemical cause.
Over centuries of medical science, mental health has famously been one of the most misunderstood facets of the human condition.
For the whole of human history, people have suffered from mental illness, but in the past it was kind of just shrugged off with the term insanity or madness.
In extreme cases, people who suffered with their mental health would be suspected of demonic possession, a diagnosis reached with exorcism.
If you think exorcism sounds bad, then wait until you hear about the alternatives.
Archaeologists have found skulls with the evidence of holes drilled into them, a practice called trepanning. This is something that we think ancient humans did to alleviate bad spirits and to release them from the brain.
In the 20th century, the drilling a hole in your head technique gets an upgrade. How does poking a stick in the brain sound?
Whether it was depression, OCD, or schizophrenia, the lobotomy was used as a treatment in all these conditions.
A burr hole is placed in the coronal suture by means of successive drills.
So basically, going into the human head, cutting connections in the brain. And in a small number of cases, it seems to have kind of worked, but in a lot of cases, it left people stupefied and sometimes just completely unable to look after themselves.
This and other questionable ethical practices like electroshock therapy and permanent incarceration are a reflection of the extremely limited research carried out into mental health. But all that is about to change, thanks to John Cade.
Cade sees his patients' mental health deteriorate before his eyes, and on those patients that do pass away, he starts to perform autopsies and notices that there are certain physical traits in their brains that are correlated with their symptoms.
The work Cade started in the prisoner of war camp would inspire his research as he returns to Melbourne after the war.
Cade is working with a number of ex-soldiers who are suffering from a variety of mental health conditions, including mania, which is characterized by hyperactivity and excessive euphoria.
In 1948, John Cade gets the idea that mania could be caused by an excess of chemicals in the body, while depressive episodes were linked to chemical deficits.
So he begins to investigate by asking the nurses if he can have samples of urine from the patients and then keeps them in his refrigerator at home.
Now, this is something you don't want to mix up with your apple juice.
I don't imagine it smelt nice either. Cade has no access to advanced chemical analyst tools, so he devises his own experiment. No, don't drink it, Tony! What he does is actually worse.
He takes the urine, puts it in syringes, and injects it into the abdominal cavities of guinea pigs. I'm talking about real fluffy guinea pigs. And he keeps upping the dose of these injections until the poor guinea pigs die. And then he just calmly notes in his notebook at what stage it was the guinea pig snuffed it.
I don't know where to begin with this. Collecting bodily fluids without the patient's permission, unregulated animal testing, unsupported experimental methods.
Yeah, not great. Cade discovers that the guinea pigs that received the urine from the manic patients died much sooner than those from the other patients.
So what does it have to say? The patients who had some type of mental health problem had more toxic urine.
Cade's next move is to try and reduce the toxicity in the manic patient's urine using a tried and tested bladder medicine, lithium.
Doctors have been prescribing lithium salts for renal problems, meaning stuff to do with the kidneys and bladder and gallbladder, since the 19th century.
So, Cade treats the toxic manic urine with medicinal lithium salts and tries again with the guinea pig injections.
Where is he getting all these guinea pigs from? It's not as though they're running around underfoot.
As Cade hoped, the lithium salts do decrease the toxicity of the urine, and it takes a greater dose to prove fatal to the guinea pigs. But the lithium salts also have another consequence that Cade hadn't anticipated.
It turned out that the guinea pigs started to become a little bit more relaxed, quiet, subdued.
Looking at the relaxed rodents gives Cade an idea. He wonders if the lithium might help his patients.
For all his questionable ethics in animal testing, John Cade was a religious man of honour and couldn't bring himself to test something on his patients that he hadn't yet tested on himself.
Oh, suddenly the man has a conscience.
So what does he do? He tries it on himself. He takes lithium salts for several weeks to see if anything bad happens. When he didn't curl up and die or develop any other disturbing symptoms, he decided it would be ethical to try it on his patients.
Cade selects his first human guinea pig from the Bundora Mental Hospital, one Bill Brand.
Bill Brand had been psychotic for something like 30 years, and he'd been an inmate at Bundora for much of that time. Now, he showed all the symptoms of psychosis and mania. He used to rummage around in the rubbish bins. He tried to escape, obviously, and he even cut the tips off 2 of his fingers.
Cade starts to give Bill Brand lithium, administered daily in liquid form.
After about 3 weeks on this course of lithium, Brand's behaviour actually starts to improve. For a start, he stops rummaging around the bins. His speech slows down. He starts to look after himself. So the signs are good.
After 2 months on lithium, Bill is able to leave Bundora, leave the place that he called home for 3 decades, and creates a more normal life for himself on the outside, finds a mainstream job.
When 9 further patients show similar signs of recovery, Cade declares his lithium treatment an outstanding success.
Great. Have a cigar. Not depressing. We'll put out an extra.
Now, this is all very exciting for Cade, but it might not actually be the groundbreaking new treatment he thinks it is. Lithium has been prescribed for people with mental health problems before.
Sorry, what?
In 1870, lithium bromide was used for a more hypnotic purpose to actually start to ease or relax a patient.
Although it's not clear what guided this 19th century investigation into lithium for mental disorders, it is a popular remedy for a time.
Other physicians across the United States prescribe lithium for mania.
But that literature is then promptly and inexplicably forgotten.
So did all of those guinea pigs die for nothing?
No, those guinea pigs did not die for nothing, because if John Cade didn't rediscover the use of lithium for mental illness, then it would have ended up maybe staying a forgotten therapy for who knows how long.
Unfortunately, Cade's high hopes come crashing back down when Bill Brand is readmitted to Bundora Hospital. Bill, it seems, has stopped taking his treatment.
Unfortunately, once he's off the lithium, he regresses badly back into the condition that led him into the psychiatric institution in the first place.
Cade's revolutionary findings go largely unnoticed by the medical community. That is, until Malgan Schuh stumbles across the paper in 1952.
Schuh is a Danish psychiatrist with a bit more of a formal approach to medical experimentation. Schuh conducts his own study, which is a lot closer to how medical trials are performed today. He did an example of what we would call a single-blind trial.
So he rolled the dice and half his patients got lithium, the other half didn't.
He found an 87% drop-off of manic and depressant episodes in the group that underwent the lithium treatment.
Lithium was now offering a new lease of life to patients who were seriously mentally unwell.
Today, Schuh is recognised all over the world for his pioneering work into producing a viable treatment for bipolar disorder. But despite the evidence that lithium does work, doctors still aren't sure exactly how it works.
Oh, that's reassuring.
It's understood that lithium affects the brain and also the spinal cord, and it increases the connection between cells.
Neurological studies of bipolar patients have revealed that they tend to have much lower volumes of grey matter in the areas of the brain that are linked to mood regulation.
But after lithium treatments, brain scans show an increase in the grey matter in the brain in the areas that deal with emotional processing and cognitive control.
Now, some 70 years after his pioneering work, John Cade is still remembered for his discovery of lithium for mental health.
It's kind of incredible to be held up as this amazing medical pioneer when he wasn't actually the first person to make this discovery. The discovery featured some pretty questionable medical ethics, and not all of these treatments actually worked.
Yes, okay, Simon. Nevertheless, Cade's work has arguably had the most far-reaching effects of any discovery in psychological medicine made by an Australian.
Weirdly specific, but okay.
I like to think that Bill Brand and those poor guinea pigs would be happy to know that their participation in medical history has helped the lives of millions of people across the world.